For our topic this session, we're going to be talking about TV and books. Our grammar point for this lesson is going to be relative clauses. Now, these can be a bit tricky, but they're actually not as bad as you might think. There are two main types of relative clauses. The first being restrictive. Restrictive clauses sound like this. The guy that wrote 1984 was my favorite author in high school. So that is modifying the guy. With non-restrictive clauses, it sounds like this. George Orwell, the guy that wrote 1984, was my favorite author in high school. So something to pay attention to are the commas with non-restrictive clauses. Let's take a look. Let's start with restrictive clauses. We form these by using the one or a subject, that or who, and a clause that follows it. So that makes the that clause. She's the one that wrote Wuthering Heights, right? You could also say, she's the one who wrote Wuthering Heights, right? So a little more detail on these. In restrictive clauses, that is the most common in North American English. In British English, they can also use which. And for restrictive clauses, the that clause provides important information and it makes the sentence make sense. With restrictive clauses, you can often drop the that, and it would still make sense. And other words we can use in this situation are who, or the one who, or the one that, to indicate something and give more information about it. So let's look at some examples. Now here are some examples, and remember that can often be dropped. So let's read it once with the that and once without. This is the girl that I told you about. The report that I've been working on all month is due tomorrow. The guy that we met yesterday was at the party. So we can also say, this is the girl I told you about. The report I've been working on all month is due tomorrow. The guy we met yesterday was at the party. So again, with our restrictive clauses, here is some more detail. This is the girl I told you about. So in the restrictive clause, the girl needs more information. So you can't say, this is the girl, without finishing the sentence. And the that clause finishes this sentence. The report I've been working on all month is due tomorrow. So again, we need information on which report. So you can say the report is due tomorrow, but we don't know which report. The guy that we met yesterday was at the party. So we can say the guy was at the party, but we need more information on which guy this is. So that's what we put in the that clause. And now on to non-restrictive clauses. So the grammar here is very different in many situations. So we can have a subject, that or who, and a clause, but there is normally something more to the sentence. So that guy over there who's wearing a hat is a musician. And here, non-restrictive clauses are also a that clause. But the sentence in the that clause is not necessary. So the sentence is already complete without the extra information. But what we have between the commas is extra information. And in non-restrictive clauses, we cannot drop the that or the who or the which, because this is very important to mark the sentence. But other words we can use are who, the one who, or the one that, or the one which, and words like this. Let's look at the difference between restrictive and non-restrictive clauses. Here are examples of non-restrictive clauses. Pavel, who went to law school with me, works at a law firm downtown. Ryan, the guy that I told you about, finally moved to Vancouver. This is the bar, which we've been to a few times, with an awesome pool table. Now, here's some more information of non-restrictive clauses. Pavel, who went to law school with me, works at a law firm downtown. So with the non-restrictive clause, who went to law school with me, that's extra information. So the sentence is complete if you say Pavel works at a law firm downtown. But Pavel, who went to law school with me, works at a law firm downtown, is extra information. And remember, you cannot drop the who, that, and which here. So let's look at the other two. Ryan, the guy that I told you about, finally moved to Vancouver. The sentence is complete if I say Ryan finally moved to Vancouver, but the sentence in between is extra information. This is the bar, which we've been to a few times, with an awesome pool table. So it's not as important that we've been there. It's the main point of the sentence is this is the bar with an awesome pool table. For this lesson, I'm going to add a few extras. So we've done restrictive clauses and non-restrictive clauses. And here we're going to add restrictive clauses with where, because it's very useful when talking about entertainment. So we form this with the one, where, and a clause. Is that the movie where they ride a motorcycle around South America? So we can use restrictive clauses with where to describe what happens in a movie, a book, or a song, or any kind of entertainment. The where clause often describes the plot or defining characteristics of something you are reading or watching or listening to. It's not necessarily grammatical, but it is very common in everyday speech. And one example that you might know is in the American sitcom Friends. Most of the episode titles begin with the one where and some kind of explanation of the plot. So the one where Rachel quits, for example. So with restrictive clauses using where, we have some pretty simple examples. They're talking about a plot point or something that happens in the show, and they sound like this. Have you seen the one where Chandler gets stuck in a bank? The Alchemist. Is that the one where the shepherd travels through the desert? I love the part where they all sing Tiny Dancer. So these three sentences involve the beginning of the sentence, where, and often it's a present tense form when you're describing the plot. So Chandler gets stuck, the shepherd travels through, they all sing. And this is very common when talking about entertainment again, so give this a shot next time you're discussing it. And let's practice. For our practice today, we're going to do something a little easier. So I have 3 sentences here, and I'd like you to pick restrictive or non-restrictive when explaining what kind of sentence this is. So the first one, my Uber driver, who is a really interesting guy, told me about this bar. So is this restrictive or non-restrictive? The director who wrote Parasite also wrote Snowpiercer. Is this restrictive or non-restrictive? The Royal Tenenbaums was the movie where they have a really big family, right? And is this restrictive or non-restrictive? Okay, let's look at the answers here. So, my Uber driver, who was a really interesting guy, told me about this bar. This one is a non-restrictive clause because who was a really interesting guy is extra information. So you can say, my Uber driver told me about this bar, and that is a complete sentence. So this is a non-restrictive clause. The director who wrote Parasite also wrote Snowpiercer. So this is a restrictive clause because the director who wrote Parasite is necessary for the rest of the sentence to make sense. So we need who wrote Parasite also wrote Snowpiercer. The Royal Tenenbaums was the movie where they have a really big family, right? This is restrictive because we need the second part of the sentence to describe the first part. Okay, so since we're talking about TV and books and entertainment, this conversation will talk about movies. So imagine you're at a movie theater and you've just seen a movie for the first time. So we have a conversation with blanks, and I'd like you to decide which word to use here based on the hints in the brackets. So the first blank is a plot point. So there's only one word we can put in there. The second blank is restrictive, and it's about a person. And the third is non-restrictive. Okay, so let's look at the answers for this conversation. Now, remember, we're talking about movies, and there are only 3 answers here that we need to fill in. So let's talk about some context. I love movies where there aren't any clear bad guys. So here, remember, the blank from the previous slide was a plot point. So for a plot, you always use the word where in restrictive clauses. Definitely. Was he the same guy who directed Princess Mononoke? So here you can use who or that because who is useful when talking about a person, but that is just as common and it makes the same amount of sense. And this one was a restrictive clause. Yeah, and that was the one which we saw together that came out the same year as Titanic. So this one is extra information. This was the non-restrictive clause, and you can use either which or that, and either are correct. So both are correct. If you are not sure, you can always use that. So those are the answers. Let's read this through to see how it sounds. That movie was awesome. I love movies where there aren't any clear bad guys. Definitely. Now, was he the same guy that directed Princess Mononoke? Yeah, and that was the one which we saw together that came out the same year as Titanic. And we're all done. I hope you feel a little more comfortable talking about TV, movies, and books with our new restrictive, non-restrictive clauses using that, which, who, and where. So next time you're watching a movie, feel free to talk about it.